The scream tore through the great hall before anyone understood what had happened. Elena stood frozen over the body of a fallen guard, her hands trembling, red staining her pale fingers, and soaking into the hem of her dress. She had not touched him. She had not hurt anyone in her life. But the proof lying at her feet said otherwise, and 40 pairs of eyes were already turning against her. Alpha King Damien Blackthorne rose from his high seat so fast that the wooden chair cracked against the stone floor behind him. His golden eyes, the eyes every wolf in the kingdom feared and respected, locked onto Elena across the hall. For one heartbeat, something soft passed through his gaze, a flicker of the man who had once pulled her close under the moonlight and promised she would never be alone again. Then his jaw hardened, and the king returned. "Explain yourself," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall like thunder, rolling over distant hills. Elena opened her mouth, but no words came. How could she explain something she did not do? She looked down at the guard, a young man named Callum who had always greeted her kindly at the gates, who had 2 small children waiting for him at home. Her stomach turned. Someone had done this to him, and now they wanted the kingdom to believe it was her. "I did not do this," she finally said, her voice shaking, but steady enough to be heard. "I swear on my life, Damien, I did not touch him." A murmur rippled through the crowd of nobles and pack members gathered for the evening feast. Elena was an Omega, the lowest rank in wolf society. Someone many of them believed should not even be allowed to speak in the presence of the king, let alone defend herself before him. She saw the sneers forming on the faces of the council members standing near the throne, men who had never approved of the quiet closeness between their king and this humble young woman. Corwin, the king's most trusted beta and closest advisor, stepped forward with practiced calm. His voice was smooth, almost gentle, the kind of voice that made lies sound like truth. "My king, the evidence speaks for itself. The blade found near her belongs to no one else in this hall. Her scent lingers strongest at the sight. I know this is difficult, but we cannot ignore what stands before us." Elena's heart pounded. She had never held that blade in her life. She looked at Damien, silently begging him to remember every quiet night they had spent together, every promise he had whispered against her hair, every moment that had made her believe, foolishly, that rank did not matter to him. That love could exist even between a king and an Omega. But Damien's face had become a wall. The pressure of the council, the weight of tradition, the eyes of every powerful pack leader present, all of it pressed down on him in that single moment, and he made a choice that would haunt him for years to come. "Take her outside the pack borders," he said, each word slow and heavy, as though it cost him something to speak them. "She is no longer welcome among us." The hall gasped. Even those who disliked Elena had not expected banishment, not without a trial, not without proof beyond a beta's word and a stained dress. But no one dared to argue with the king, not even the elders who valued fairness above fear. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She looked at Damien one last time, searching his face for any sign of doubt, any flicker of the man she loved. She found nothing but cold resolve. Something inside her chest cracked in half. "You know me," she whispered, so quietly that only he could hear it over the murmuring crowd. "You know I would never do this." Damien did not answer. He could not with Corwin watching him so closely, not with the entire council waiting to see if their king would bend the law for a woman of low rank. He turned his face away, unable to watch, as 2 guards approached her, their hands firm but not unkind, as they led her toward the great doors. As Elena walked through the hall, past the nobles who stepped back from her as though she carried some plague, past the pack members who whispered cruel words under their breath, she held her head high, despite the tears burning in her eyes. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. She placed one hand gently against her stomach, hidden beneath the folds of her dress, a secret she had been carrying for nearly 2 months now, a secret that no one in that hall knew, not even the king who had just cast her out like a stranger. She was carrying his child. The heir to the Blackthorn throne was growing inside her, and not a single soul among them had any idea. The great doors of the hall swung open, letting in the cold night air. Elena stepped through them without looking back, her blood still staining her hands, her heart shattered into pieces she was not sure could ever be put back together. Behind her, she heard Damien's voice rise once more, sharp and commanding, ordering the hall back to order. pretending as though nothing had just broken inside him too. She walked until the torches of the pack house faded into darkness behind her, until the scent of home disappeared and was replaced by the wild, unfamiliar smell of the forest beyond the borders. Only then did she allow herself to stop, pressing her back against the rough bark of an ancient tree, sliding down until she sat upon the cold earth. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, around the tiny life growing within her, and let the tears fall freely for the first time since the guard's body had been discovered. She thought of the nights she and Damien had shared in secret, meeting far from the pack house where no one could see them, where rank meant nothing, and they were simply two souls drawn together by something neither of them could explain. She remembered the way he used to trace circles on her palm while they lay beneath the stars, promising her that one day things would be different, that one day he would find a way for them to be together openly. She had believed him. She had believed in the softness behind his golden eyes, the gentleness hidden beneath his crown. But belief meant nothing now. He had chosen his throne over her without a moment's hesitation, and she had been cast into the wilderness, carrying a secret that could change everything, if only she dared to speak it. She would not speak it, not now, not to a king who had looked at her with such coldness, who had let his counsel and his fear of tradition outweigh whatever love he claimed to feel. If he could turn his back on her so easily, she would not hand him another reason to control her life, or the life of the child she now vowed to protect with everything she had. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness, and Elena's head snapped up, every instinct alert despite her exhaustion. Wild wolves roamed these borderlands, packs with no loyalty to Blackthorn law, creatures who would not hesitate to attack a lone Omega wandering through their territory. She forced herself to stand, ignoring the ache in her legs and the trembling in her hands, and began to walk deeper into the forest, away from the only home she had ever known. The night stretched on, long and unforgiving. Elena moved carefully, using the small amount of training she had received as a child to mask her scent as best she could, rubbing crushed leaves and damp earth along her arms and clothing. Her mother, long past now, had taught her these small survival tricks during quiet afternoons in their modest home, never imagining her daughter would one day need them to survive true exile. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the sky, Elena had reached a narrow stream cutting through the forest floor. She knelt beside it, cupping the cold water in her hands and drinking deeply, then splashing it against her face and arms, finally washing away the last traces of blood that had clung to her skin since the previous night. As the red swirled away into the current, she felt something shift inside her, a hardening of resolve that had not been there before. She would survive this. She would survive for the child inside her, for the innocent life that deserved better than to be born into a world of politics and betrayal. She would find a way to build a life far from Blackthorn territory, far from Damien's cold judgment and Corwin's calculating eyes. As she rose from the stream, wiping her hands against her ruined dress, Elena caught a scent on the breeze that made her freeze in place. Wolf, close, watching. She turned slowly, her heart hammering, ready to run or fight, whatever the moment required. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, tall and sharp-eyed, with silver-streaked hair pulled back from a weathered but kind face. She wore simple clothing, nothing like the fine fabrics worn by Blackthorn nobles, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived many hardships. "You are far from any packed territory I recognize," the woman said, her voice careful, neither hostile nor entirely welcoming. "And you smell like trouble follows you." Elena straightened her shoulders, refusing to show the fear pulsing through her veins. "I mean no harm to you, or your pack. I am simply passing through." The woman studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in the torn dress, the exhaustion written across Elena's face, the careful way she held herself, as though protecting something precious. "You are not simply passing through," the woman said finally. "You are running, and unless I am mistaken, you are running from more than just danger behind you." Elena said nothing, unwilling to reveal more than necessary to a stranger, no matter how kind her eyes appeared. Trust had already cost her everything once. She would not make that mistake again so quickly. "My name is Mariana," the woman continued, taking a slow step closer, palms open in a gesture meant to show she carried no weapon and intended no threat. "I lead a small pack of rogues not far from here. We take in those who have nowhere else to go. No questions asked, unless you wish to share." Elena hesitated, weighing the offer against every instinct screaming at her to keep moving, to trust no one, to rely only on herself from now on. But exhaustion was pulling at her limbs, and the sun was rising higher, and somewhere deep inside her, a small voice reminded her that survival sometimes required accepting help, even from strangers. "I have nowhere else to go," Elena admitted quietly, the words tasting bitter and true all at once. Mariana nodded, as though she had expected exactly this answer. "Then come. Rest first. Explanations can wait, until you are ready to give them, if you ever are." Elena followed the older woman through the trees, her legs moving on pure exhaustion now, her mind replaying the events of the previous night, over and over. The accusation, the blood that was not hers, Damien's cold voice ordering her exile. The weight of the secret pressed against her palm as she walked, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, without her even realizing she had placed it there. Mariana noticed the gesture but said nothing, filing the observation away for later. Whatever secrets this young woman carried, they were clearly heavier than mere banishment, but pushing too hard, too fast, would only send her running again, and something told Mariana that this Omega had already run far enough for one lifetime. They walked in silence until they reached a small camp nestled between towering trees, a handful of simple shelters built from wood and stone, smoke rising gently from a central fire, where a few other rogue wolves sat quietly, watching the newcomer with cautious curiosity, but no open hostility. "You will be safe here," Mariana said, gesturing toward one of the smaller shelters, "for as long as you need." Elena looked around at the modest camp, so different from the grand halls of Blackthorn territory, so far removed from crowns and councils and betrayal. For the first time since the previous night, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. She did not know yet how long she would stay in these borderlands, how many years might pass before fate brought her back into contact with the king who had cast her aside. She did not know that the child growing inside her would one day carry the weight of two worlds, born of both exile and royalty, hidden and hunted in equal measure. All she knew, as she finally allowed herself to rest inside the small shelter Mariana had offered, was that she would protect this child with everything she had. No matter what it cost her, no matter how far she had to run, no matter how many years it took before the truth finally found its way back to the throne she had left behind, covered in blood that was never hers, carrying a secret that would one day change everything. Outside, the forest settled into quiet morning stillness, birds beginning their songs as though the world had not shifted so violently in the span of a single night. But within the walls of the small shelter, Elena lay curled on a simple bed of woven blankets, one hand resting gently against her stomach, silent tears slipping down her cheeks as exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless sleep. Far behind her, within the stone walls of the Blackthorn packhouse, King Damien Blackthorn stood alone on his balcony, overlooking the dark forest, unable to sleep, unable to shake the image of Elena's face, as she had looked at him one final time, before the guards led her away. Something had felt wrong about the entire situation from the very beginning, a wrongness he had been too pressured, too afraid, too blinded by tradition, to properly examine in the heat of the moment. He gripped the stone railing tightly, his knuckles turning pale, as doubt began to creep into the edges of his certainty. Corwin's evidence had seemed convincing enough in the chaos of the hall, but now, standing alone in the quiet darkness, Damien found himself questioning every detail, the blade that conveniently belonged to no one, the scent that had lingered so precisely at the scene, the timing that had worked so perfectly against the one woman he had trusted more than anyone else in his kingdom. He did not yet know the depth of what he had lost that night, nor the truth still hidden within Corwin's carefully constructed lies. He did not know that somewhere beyond his borders, in a small rogue camp hidden among ancient trees, the woman he loved carried a secret, capable of reshaping the very future of his kingdom. All he knew, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, was that something inside him refused to accept that Elena was capable of the crime he had banished her for. And that refusal, small and quiet as it was in that moment, would eventually grow into a determination that would change the course of everything that followed. The kingdom slept on, unaware of the storm quietly building on its horizon, a king wrestling with doubt, an exiled Omega carrying a hidden heir. A conspiracy still hidden beneath careful lies, and somewhere in the space between betrayal and truth, a story was only just beginning, one that would take years to fully unfold, one that would test loyalty, love, and the very foundations of royal power before it finally reached its resolution. Weeks passed in the rogue camp, and Elena slowly learned the rhythms of a life she never imagined she would live. Gone were the polished floors and silk gowns of Blackthorn territory. In their place stood simple wooden shelters, the smell of wood smoke, and the quiet companionship of wolves, who asked for nothing but honesty in return for shelter. Mariana kept her word. She asked no questions Elena was not ready to answer, though her sharp eyes often lingered on the way Elena pressed a hand to her stomach when she thought no one was watching, or the way she winced slightly during the early hours of morning, when sickness crept up on her without warning. One evening, as the camp settled around the fire for a simple meal of roasted roots and dried meat, Mariana finally sat beside Elena, close enough for a private conversation, but far enough that the others would not overhear. "You are with child," Mariana said quietly, not a question, but a gentle statement of fact. Elena's hand froze halfway to her mouth. She considered denying it, considered spinning some story to protect the truth a little longer, but exhaustion and loneliness had worn down her defenses more than she realized. She lowered her hand and nodded slowly. "How far along?" Mariana asked, her voice carrying no judgment, only quiet concern. "Nearly 3 months now," Elena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mariana studied her for a long moment, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "The father is someone powerful," she said, not quite a question either. "Someone connected to whatever drove you from your pack." Elena's silence answered clearly enough. Mariana did not press further, though the pieces were beginning to form a picture in her mind, one involving crowns and thrones, and the kind of danger that followed royal bloodlines wherever they traveled. "You will need to be careful," Mariana said instead, placing a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "A child born of royal blood carries a scent that grows stronger with age. It will not stay hidden forever, especially once the child begins to shift for the first time." Elena's chest tightened at the reminder of dangers still waiting ahead, dangers she had barely begun to consider in the fog of grief and survival that had consumed her since her exile. She had been so focused on simply surviving each day that she had not allowed herself to think too far into the future, into what her child's life might actually look like once born. "I will protect my child," Elena said firmly, meeting Mariana's gaze with quiet determination, "no matter what it takes." Mariana nodded slowly, respect flickering behind her sharp eyes. "Then let us begin preparing you properly. Fear alone will not keep a child safe. Knowledge and strength will serve you far better." Over the following weeks, Mariana took it upon herself to teach Elena everything she knew about surviving as a rogue, about masking scents, about reading the movements of other packs from a safe distance, about defending herself, and eventually her child, from threats that might emerge from any direction. Elena absorbed every lesson eagerly, grateful for purpose, amid the uncertainty of her new life. She thought of Damien often during those quiet weeks, unable to fully release the memories of tenderness they had once shared, despite the pain of his final betrayal. She wondered if he ever thought of her, if any part of him regretted the swift judgment he had passed that terrible night. She wondered, with a bitterness that surprised her, whether he had already moved on entirely, already forgotten the Omega he had cast aside so easily. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself that whatever feelings still lingered needed to be buried alongside her old life, replaced entirely by her new purpose, as a mother, preparing to raise a child alone, far from crowns and thrones and royal expectations. But some nights, lying awake in her small shelter, with one hand resting against the gentle curve of her stomach, she allowed herself to remember. The warmth of Damien's hand against her cheek, the sound of his laughter, rare and precious, reserved only for their private moments together. The way he used to whisper that she was the only person who ever made him feel like more than just a king, like simply a man capable of loving freely. Those memories brought both comfort and pain in equal measure, reminders of a happiness she had believed in fully, only to watch it shatter in a single devastating moment inside that great hall. As the months passed, and Elena's belly grew rounder, the camp slowly became something resembling home. She formed careful friendships with a few of the other rogue wolves, quiet souls who had their own stories of exile and loss, their own reasons for choosing life beyond pack boundaries, rather than within them. There was Owen, a broad-shouldered rogue with a gentle heart despite his intimidating size, who had left his birth pack after refusing to follow an alpha he considered cruel and unjust. There was Willa, a sharp-tongued young woman who had escaped an arranged mating she wanted no part of, finding freedom and purpose within Mariana's growing community of outcasts. They welcomed Elena without judgment, offering small kindnesses that helped ease the loneliness pressing constantly at the edges of her heart. Owen taught her simple defensive movements, adjusted carefully for her changing body. Willa shared stories late into the evening that made Elena laugh for the first time since her exile began, a sound that felt foreign and precious all at once. Slowly, painfully, Elena began to heal, even as the wound left by Damien's betrayal remained tender beneath the surface. She allowed herself to imagine a future within these borderlands, raising her child among people who valued honesty and loyalty over rank and bloodline, far removed from the politics that had cost her everything she once held dear. But even as she settled into this new rhythm, a quiet unease continued to grow within her. Mariana's warning echoed constantly in the back of her mind. A child born of royal blood carries a scent that grows stronger with age. It will not stay hidden forever. Elena knew, deep down, that her peace within this camp could only last so long. Eventually, her secret would demand to be known, whether she was ready or not. Eventually, the son or daughter she carried would grow strong enough that hiding would no longer be possible. She pressed a protective hand against her stomach one quiet evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange and purple above the tree line, and made a silent promise to the child within her. Whatever came next, whatever dangers waited on the horizon, she would face them without hesitation. She would build whatever strength necessary to protect this child, even if it meant standing against a king one day, even if it meant revealing truths that could reshape an entire kingdom. The wind carried the scent of approaching winter through the camp, a reminder that time continued moving forward regardless of her fears or her hopes. Somewhere beyond these borders, life within Blackthorn territory continued as well, unaware of the secret quietly growing within a rogue camp hidden among ancient trees. Elena did not yet know how much longer her peace would last, nor how dramatically her path would eventually cross again with the king who had once broken her heart so completely. All she knew, as she finally rose and made her way back toward her small shelter for the night, was that she was no longer simply surviving. She was preparing for whatever storm still waited ahead, preparing to protect the precious life growing within her, no matter what the cost. Inside the great stone halls of Blackthorn territory, Damien sat alone in his private study, long after the rest of the packhouse had gone quiet for the night. Candlelight flickered across scattered papers on his desk, reports from scouts, notes from council meetings, none of it holding his attention the way it once had. 3 months had passed since he banished Elena from his kingdom, and not a single night had passed without her face appearing in his thoughts. He rubbed his tired eyes and reached for the small wooden box tucked in the bottom drawer of his desk, a box he had not opened since the night she left. Inside rested a simple silver ring, one he had commissioned in secret, intended as a gift for a future he had imagined sharing with her, once he found the courage to defy tradition and claim her openly as his mate. He had never given it to her. Now he wondered if he ever would. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Corwin entered without waiting for permission, a habit that had grown increasingly common in recent weeks, one that Damien found himself noticing with growing irritation. "You wish to review the border reports, my king," Corwin said smoothly, setting a stack of papers on the desk. Damien studied his beta carefully, searching for something he could not quite name. Corwin had served him faithfully for years, ever since they were young wolves training together, beneath the old king's watchful eye. Yet something about the events of that terrible night continued to bother him, small inconsistencies that refused to settle quietly in his mind, no matter how many times he tried to dismiss them. "Corwin," Damien said slowly, watching his beta's expression closely, "tell me again how you discovered the blade near Elena." A flicker of something passed behind Corwin's eyes, gone so quickly that Damien almost convinced himself he had imagined it. "As I told the council, my king, I noticed it while investigating the scene immediately after the guard was found. It seemed clear enough at the time." "And her scent," Damien pressed, keeping his voice carefully neutral despite the tension building in his chest. "You said it lingered strongest at the site, strong enough to convince an entire hall in mere moments." "I only reported what I observed," Corwin said, a slight edge entering his otherwise smooth tone. Are you questioning my loyalty, my king? Damien held his beta's gaze for a long, heavy moment, before finally looking away, returning his attention to the papers scattered across his desk. No, he said quietly, though the word felt hollow, even as he spoke it. Simply reviewing every detail. A king cannot afford loose threads. Corwin nodded and excused himself, leaving Damien alone once more with his thoughts and his doubts. As soon as the door closed, Damien rose from his desk and moved to the window overlooking the training grounds below, illuminated faintly by scattered torchlight. He thought of Callum, the young guard who had lost his life that night, a wolf with a family who deserved justice, real justice, not a hastily assigned blame that conveniently silenced questions and preserved political alliances. He thought of Elena's face as she swore her innocence before the entire hall, the desperate honesty in her eyes that he had chosen to ignore in favor of appearing decisive before his council. Guilt gnawed at him with increasing intensity as the weeks passed. He began quietly reviewing old records, cross-referencing guard rotations from the night of the murder, examining every detail he could access without drawing unwanted attention from Corwin or the council members who had pushed so hard for Elena's swift banishment. Slowly, carefully, a different picture began forming, one that unsettled him deeply. Callum had been assigned to guard a private meeting room that evening, a room where Corwin had met privately with a visiting dignitary just hours before the murder took place. The timeline, once Damien examined it properly, left very little room for Elena to have been anywhere near that location during the critical window when the killing had occurred. He sat with this knowledge for several sleepless nights, unwilling to accept the growing suspicion forming in his mind, unwilling to believe that his most trusted advisor, a wolf he had known since childhood, could have orchestrated such a devastating betrayal, for reasons he still could not fully understand. But the pieces continued to align, in ways that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Damien began his own quiet investigation, careful never to reveal his suspicions openly, wary of tipping off Corwin before he had gathered enough evidence to act with certainty. He spoke privately with a handful of trusted pack members, guards who had been stationed nearby that night, servants who might have noticed something unusual in the hours before the murder was discovered. Slowly, piece by careful piece, a clearer picture began to emerge. One guard mentioned seeing Corwin near the private meeting room shortly before the alarm was raised, a detail conveniently omitted from the official report given to the council. Another recalled noticing an unfamiliar scent near the scene, one that did not match Elena's at all, a detail that had been quickly dismissed in the chaos and urgency of that terrible night. Damien felt something cold settle in his chest as the evidence continued mounting against the wolf he had trusted for so many years. If Corwin had truly orchestrated this entire situation, framing an innocent Omega for a crime he himself had committed or arranged, the implications stretched far beyond a single tragic night. It meant Damien's closest advisor had been willing to destroy an innocent woman's life, willing to let a murderer walk free, simply to achieve whatever hidden goal drove his actions. He needed proof, undeniable proof that could withstand scrutiny before the entire council, before he could move against a wolf as politically connected and carefully positioned as Corwin. Rushing forward without absolute certainty would only give Corwin the opportunity to cover his tracks more thoroughly, or worse, to turn the council against Damien himself, questioning his judgment and stability as king. So Damien waited, gathering evidence patiently, despite the guilt eating away at him with every passing day, knowing that somewhere beyond his borders, Elena carried the burden of a punishment she never deserved, a burden he had personally sentenced her to endure. He began sending trackers into the borderlands under the guise of routine patrols, instructing them quietly to search for any trace of the exiled Omega, hoping desperately to find some sign that she remained safe, that she had survived the harsh months since her banishment. Each report that returned empty-handed only deepened the ache settling permanently in his chest. Elena had vanished, as though the forest itself had swallowed her whole, leaving no trail for even his most skilled trackers to follow. He did not know, could not have known, that Mariana's careful teachings and Elena's own determination had helped mask her presence so thoroughly that even experienced Blackthorn scouts found nothing beyond faint traces that led nowhere useful. Weeks turned into months as Damien continued his careful investigation, building his case against Corwin piece by piece, while simultaneously searching for any sign of the woman he had wronged so terribly. The strain of maintaining this dual pursuit while ruling his kingdom and appearing composed before his council began wearing visibly on him, though few dared comment on the changes they noticed in their king's demeanor. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, spending long hours alone in his study poring over reports and records. He grew sharper with those who tested his patience, his temper shorter than it had ever been before Elena's banishment. The pack members, who had once found him a fair and measured leader, began whispering among themselves, wondering what troubled their king so deeply, though none dared ask him directly. Only Damien knew the true source of his growing unrest, a combination of guilt over the injustice he had allowed, and fear that he might never find Elena again to properly right the wrong he had committed against her. He replayed that terrible night in the Great Hall constantly, imagining different outcomes where he had trusted her innocence, where he had demanded proper investigation before passing judgment so swiftly. But wishing could not undo what had already been done. All he could do now was continue building his case, continue searching every corner of his kingdom and beyond for any trace of Elena, and prepare himself for the moment when he might finally have enough evidence to expose Corwin's betrayal before the entire council. He did not yet know how much time had passed for Elena within her hidden rogue camp, did not know about the child growing within her that carried his own royal bloodline, a secret that would eventually reshape everything he thought he understood about his own past mistakes and future responsibilities. As autumn deepened into the harsh chill of early winter, Damien stood once more on his private balcony, staring out toward the distant borderlands where he suspected Elena might have fled all those months ago. The stars above seemed to offer no answers, no comfort, only the same silent question that had haunted him every night since her banishment. Would he ever find her again? And if he did, would she ever be willing to forgive the king who had chosen political pressure over the truth he should have trusted in her eyes? He closed his hand around the small silver ring he had carried with him constantly since retrieving it from his desk drawer, a physical reminder of promises broken and love betrayed by his own weakness in a moment that had demanded far greater strength and conviction than he had been able to summon. Somewhere beyond the borders of his kingdom, unknown to him, life continued moving forward without his knowledge or guidance. A child grew steadily within Elena's protective care, a child who would one day carry both his golden eyes and his royal legacy, though neither father nor son knew yet of the other's existence. The threads of fate continued weaving quietly in the darkness, drawing closer together with each passing season, though the full reunion still waited years ahead. Hidden behind the slow unfolding of consequences neither Damien nor Elena could yet fully anticipate. The cry of a newborn echoed through the small shelter as the first snow of the season fell gently outside. Mariana knelt beside Elena, guiding her through the final difficult moments with the steady calm of someone who had helped bring many lives into the world during her years leading the rogue camp. Willa stood nearby, boiling water and preparing clean cloths, her usual sharp humor replaced entirely by focused determination to help however she could. When the tiny boy finally arrived, his cries filling the small wooden shelter, Elena felt every ounce of pain and exhaustion melt away beneath an overwhelming wave of love. Mariana carefully wrapped him in a soft blanket and placed him gently against Elena's chest, and for a long moment, the entire world seemed to narrow down to nothing but the tiny, perfect face staring up at her. Then Mariana's breath caught softly, and Elena looked up to see the older woman studying the baby's eyes with unmistakable recognition. Golden, bright, unmistakable gold, exactly like his father's. He carries the mark of a true-born heir, Mariana said quietly, careful to keep her voice low despite there being no one else nearby to overhear. This is no ordinary bloodline, Elena. Elena nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks as she gazed at her son's tiny face. His name is Kian, she whispered, the name coming to her instinctively, as though she had known it all along, waiting simply for the right moment to speak it into existence. Mariana smiled gently, reaching out to touch the baby's small hand with careful reverence, a strong name for what will surely be a strong wolf. Over the following weeks, Elena settled into the exhausting but deeply meaningful rhythm of caring for her newborn son within the rogue camp. Owen and Willa became doting honorary family, Owen constructing a sturdy wooden cradle with careful hands despite his usual gruff exterior, Willa sewing small blankets and clothing from whatever fabric scraps she could gather or trade. Kian grew quickly, far more quickly than Elena had expected based on stories she had heard about typical wolf pup development. By the time he was only a few months old, his eyes had already sharpened with an alertness beyond his age, watching everything around him with unsettling intensity for one so young. Mariana noticed these signs with growing concern, though she kept her observations carefully measured, unwilling to alarm Elena unnecessarily during such a precious and exhausting time. But privately, she began preparing Elena for conversations that would need to happen eventually, conversations about hiding a child whose very bloodline made concealment increasingly difficult with each passing month. "He will need to learn control early," Mariana said, one quiet evening, as they sat together near the fire, Kian sleeping peacefully in Elena's arms. Children of powerful bloodlines often struggle to suppress their instincts naturally. It will require patience and careful teaching, more than most pups his age would need. Elena nodded, already anticipating the challenges ahead, even as exhaustion pulled at the edges of her focus. "I will do whatever it takes to protect him," she said firmly, the same vow she had made to herself since the very night of her exile. As the seasons turned, and Kian grew from infant to toddler, Elena dedicated herself entirely to raising him within the careful boundaries of camp life, teaching him from an early age to speak quietly, to move carefully, to understand that their safety depended on remaining unnoticed by the wider world beyond their hidden forest home. He was a bright child, curious and quick to learn, though occasionally his natural instincts threatened to overwhelm the careful lessons Elena worked so hard to instill in him. There were moments, small and fleeting, when his dominance flared unexpectedly, when other pups within the camp instinctively deferred to him despite his young age, when adult rogues found themselves unconsciously lowering their eyes in his presence, without fully understanding why. Elena watched these moments with growing unease, understanding all too well what they represented. Her son carried true alpha blood, powerful and impossible to fully suppress no matter how carefully she tried to teach him restraint. Sooner or later, that power would draw attention, whether she wished it to or not. She thought often during those years about Damien, wondering whether he had continued searching for her, wondering whether his feelings had cooled into indifference or hardened into resentment over what he likely still believed was her guilt in Callum's death. She wondered if he ever thought about the child he did not know existed, a son who shared his golden eyes and, increasingly, his commanding presence. She kept these thoughts carefully private, never voicing them to Mariana or the others, though she suspected the older woman sensed at least some of the complicated emotions still lingering beneath Elena's carefully composed exterior. Grief and love had a way of intertwining, until they became almost indistinguishable from one another, a truth Elena understood more deeply with each passing season. Life within the rogue camp continued its steady rhythm, seasons cycling through harsh winters and warm summers, the small community growing slightly, as other outcasts occasionally found their way to Mariana's protective territory. Elena formed deeper friendships during these years, finding unexpected joy and purpose in a life so different from the one she had once imagined for herself within Blackthorn territory. She taught Kian everything she knew, from practical survival skills to the quiet history of their world, careful always to omit any mention of his true father, unwilling to burden him with knowledge that could put them both in greater danger should he ever accidentally reveal it. He grew to believe, as far as Elena could tell, that his father had simply died before his birth, a story that pained her to maintain, but felt necessary for both their safety. By the time Kian reached his 5th year, he had grown into a remarkably capable young wolf, strong for his age, sharp-minded, and increasingly difficult to fully contain within the boundaries Elena had worked so hard to establish. His instinctive dominance continued growing stronger, drawing curious glances from visiting rogues who passed through Mariana's camp on rare occasions, wondering aloud about the unusual presence radiating from such a young pup. Elena knew, with growing certainty, that their peaceful existence within the hidden camp could not last much longer. The careful balance she had maintained for years was beginning to shift, and somewhere on the horizon, change was approaching whether she felt ready for it or not. She held Kian close one quiet evening, as the sun set behind the tree line, watching him drift toward sleep despite his usual restless energy, and found herself wondering, not for the first time, what the future truly held for both of them. Whatever came next, she promised herself silently. She would face it with the same fierce determination that had carried her through every difficult moment since the night she walked away from Blackthorn territory, covered in blood that was never hers, carrying a secret that continued growing stronger with every passing day. 5 years had passed since Elena walked away from Blackthorn territory, and the quiet rogue camp she once viewed as a temporary refuge had slowly become the only home Kian had ever known. He raced through the trees with Owen chasing playfully behind him, his small legs carrying him faster than any 5-year-old pup had any right to move, his laughter echoing through the forest in a sound that never failed to lift Elena's spirits, despite the underlying worry that had grown steadily within her over recent months. Kian had become something remarkable to watch, strong and quick-witted, with an instinctive understanding of leadership that seemed far beyond his years. The younger pups within the camp naturally gathered around him during play, following his lead without question, while even some of the adult rogues found themselves unconsciously treating him with a deference typically reserved for wolves of far higher status. Mariana watched these developments with careful attention, her concern deepening alongside her clear affection for the remarkable child who had grown up within her protective care. She pulled Elena aside one crisp morning, her expression more serious than usual. "We need to speak," Mariana said quietly, guiding Elena toward a private clearing away from the main camp where Kian and the other pups played nearby. Elena felt her stomach tighten with familiar dread, sensing the weight behind Mariana's careful tone. "What has happened?" "Nothing yet," Mariana said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "But scouts from a neighboring territory passed through the outer edges of our land 3 days ago. They noticed something unusual, a presence they described as far too commanding for a pup so young. Word travels quickly among rogue communities, Elena. I fear it will not be long before more organized packs begin asking questions about the child living among us." Elena's heart sank, though she had known this moment would eventually arrive. She had simply hoped for more time, more years to prepare Kian properly, more distance built between his current life and the shadow of his royal bloodline. "What do you suggest?" Elena asked, forcing calm into her voice, despite the fear pulsing beneath the surface. Mariana considered carefully before answering. "For now, we continue as we have been, but you must prepare yourself, Elena. The day may come when this camp is no longer safe enough to protect him fully. When that day arrives, you will need somewhere else to go, somewhere with stronger protection than a small rogue community can offer." Elena nodded slowly, already turning over possibilities in her mind, though few options felt genuinely safe given the circumstances surrounding her exile and the powerful bloodline her son carried. Meanwhile, within Blackthorn territory, King Damien had transformed considerably over the 5 years since Elena's banishment. The warmth that once softened his commanding presence had hardened into something colder, more calculated, a shift that had not gone unnoticed by those closest to him. He remained unmarried, despite significant pressure from his council to secure an heir through proper political alliance, a refusal that continued fueling whispered speculation throughout the pack house. He had continued his careful investigation into Corwin over the years, gathering evidence slowly and methodically, while maintaining careful appearances of trust between himself and his beta. The picture had grown increasingly clear with each passing season, revealing a web of manipulation that extended far beyond the single incident involving Callum's death. Corwin, it seemed, had been quietly consolidating power for years, forming alliances with disgruntled council members, positioning loyal wolves within key positions throughout the pack hierarchy, all while maintaining a carefully constructed image of unwavering loyalty to his king. Elena's banishment, Damien had come to understand, had likely served multiple purposes for his ambitious beta, eliminating a perceived threat to his influence, while simultaneously demonstrating his own value as a decisive advisor, willing to act swiftly in moments of crisis. Damien's growing certainty about Corwin's betrayal had not yet translated into action, held back by his continued need for undeniable proof before moving against such a politically entrenched figure. But his patience was wearing thin, worn down by 5 years of guilt over Elena's fate and growing anger at the realization of how thoroughly he had been manipulated. His army had grown significantly stronger during these years as well, a natural consequence of his increasingly focused determination to expand his territory's security, and, though he rarely admitted it even to himself, to increase his capacity to search for any trace of the woman he had wronged so terribly. Scouts continued patrolling the borderlands regularly, though years of fruitless searching had gradually shifted their mission from active pursuit toward routine territorial monitoring. It was during one such routine patrol that fate finally began drawing the separate threads of this story closer together. A group of Blackthorn scouts, patrolling the outer edges of neutral territory, near where several rogue communities were known to exist, encountered a skirmish between two smaller rogue groups disputing hunting rights along a contested stretch of forest. Among the chaos of the brief conflict, one particularly sharp-eyed general, named Godric, caught sight of a young pup moving with unusual speed and coordination, directing several older rogues with an authority that seemed entirely unnatural for a child so young. Godric said nothing in the moment, too focused on ensuring his patrol's safety during the unexpected encounter, but the memory lingered with him throughout the journey back to Blackthorn territory. Something about that pup's commanding presence, the golden tint he thought he glimpsed in the child's eyes during a brief moment of eye contact, refused to leave his thoughts. Upon returning to the pack house, Godric requested a private audience with King Damien, uncertain whether his observation held any real significance, but unwilling to dismiss it entirely given how deeply unusual the encounter had felt. "My king," Godric said carefully once granted an audience, "I witnessed something during our patrol that I believe warrants your attention." Damien listened intently as Godric described the skirmish, the young pup's unnatural authority, the fleeting glimpse of golden eyes that had stayed with him throughout the journey home. Something cold and electric shot through Damien's chest as he absorbed every detail, hope and dread intertwining so completely that he could barely distinguish between the two sensations. "Where exactly did this encounter take place?" Damien asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the storm building rapidly within him. Godric provided the location as precisely as he could recall, watching with growing curiosity as his king's expression shifted through several unreadable emotions in quick succession. "Gather a small, discreet party," Damien instructed, rising from his seat with sudden purposeful energy. "We ride within the hour. Tell no one else of this conversation, Godric. Not the council, not Corwin, no one." Godric nodded, sensing the gravity behind his king's request, even without fully understanding its origin, and moved quickly to assemble a small, trusted group for what promised to be an unusual and highly sensitive mission. As Damien prepared for the journey, his mind raced through possibilities he had not allowed himself to consider in years. Could it truly be her? Could Elena have survived these 5 long years, hidden somewhere just beyond his reach this entire time? And if the child Godric described truly carried golden eyes, what could that possibly mean, beyond the possibility he barely dared to consider? He forced himself to remain calm, reminding himself repeatedly that golden eyes, while rare, were not entirely impossible among other bloodlines scattered throughout the wider wolf world. He could not allow himself to hope too fully, not when disappointment might prove more devastating than continued uncertainty. Yet as his small party rode out from Blackthorn territory that evening, moving swiftly and quietly toward the location Godric had described, Damien could not fully suppress the desperate hope building steadily within his chest, a hope he had not allowed himself to feel so strongly in years. Somewhere ahead, within the shifting boundaries of contested rogue territory, the threads of fate that had been slowly weaving together across 5 long years were finally drawing toward their first true collision, though neither Elena nor Damien yet understood just how dramatically their reunion would reshape everything that followed. The skirmish that Godric had witnessed left lingering tension across the contested borderlands, and within days, word of the conflict had spread among the scattered rogue communities living along the disputed territory. Mariana heard the reports with growing unease, understanding immediately the danger such attention posed to her camp, and particularly to the young boy whose commanding presence had apparently drawn notice from more than one observer during the brief clash. She gathered Elena, Owen, and Willa for an urgent conversation once the children had been settled for the evening, her expression graver than Elena had seen in a long time. "We can no longer stay here safely," Mariana said without preamble, her voice tight with concern. "Word is already spreading about Kian. It is only a matter of time before someone connects the dots, before someone realizes exactly what kind of bloodline produces a pup with such unnatural authority." Elena felt panic rising in her chest, though she forced herself to remain outwardly calm for the sake of everyone gathered around her. Where can we possibly go? We have built our entire life here. Mariana considered carefully before answering. There is a kingdom to the north, the Ashgard territory. Their current alpha owes a debt to my family from many years ago, before I chose this rogue life. It is not a debt he can easily refuse to honor, should I call upon it now. Elena hesitated, uncertain about placing her trust and her son's safety in the hands of a distant alpha she had never met, governed by politics and obligations she barely understood. But the alternative, remaining in a location increasingly compromised by unwanted attention, felt far more dangerous. How quickly can we leave? Elena asked finally, already beginning to mentally catalog what few possessions she would need to gather for such an urgent journey. Within the day, Mariana said firmly. I will send word ahead through trusted channels, but we cannot afford to wait for a response before moving. Every day we remain here increases the risk to both of you. That night, Elena packed quickly and quietly, careful not to alarm Kian more than necessary despite his sharp intuition that something significant had shifted within their small community. She explained gently that they would be traveling to a new home, careful to keep her tone reassuring, despite the fear tightening steadily in her chest. Will Owen and Willa come too? Kian asked, his young voice carrying genuine worry at the prospect of leaving behind the only family he had known beyond his mother. Owen will help guide us part of the way, Elena said carefully, glancing toward Owen, who nodded in confirmation. Willa will stay to help Mariana here, but we will find ways to stay connected, I promise you. Kian accepted this explanation with the quiet resilience Elena had come to recognize in him, a maturity that both comforted and worried her given how young he truly still was. She hugged him close for a long moment, grateful beyond words for the strength and adaptability he had somehow developed despite the unusual circumstances of his young life. They departed before dawn the following morning, moving swiftly and carefully through unfamiliar terrain as Owen led them along hidden paths designed to avoid detection from any wandering patrols. The journey toward Ashgard territory would take several days, each one filled with careful vigilance and quiet tension as they moved further from the only home Kian had ever known. Meanwhile, Damien's small party had arrived at the location Godric described, only to find the rogue camp already abandoned, fires cold, shelters emptied of any meaningful possessions. Whatever community had gathered there previously had clearly departed in haste, leaving behind little indication of where they might have traveled next. Damien felt frustration and desperate disappointment settling heavily in his chest as he surveyed the empty camp, searching for any clue that might indicate whether Elena had truly been among the group who once lived there. Godric moved carefully through the abandoned shelters, eventually calling Damien over to examine a small object left behind in the haste of departure. A tiny wooden carving, crude but clearly crafted with care, depicting a simple wolf shape, the kind of small toy a parent might create for a beloved child. Damien held the small carving carefully in his palm, studying it with an intensity that surprised even himself. He could not know with certainty that this object belonged to Elena's son, could not be entirely sure that his desperate hope had any real foundation beyond a fleeting glimpse of golden eyes, reported by a single scout. But something deep within him, some instinct he could not fully explain, told him he was finally on the right path, after 5 long years of uncertainty. Which direction did they travel? Damien asked Godric, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Godric knelt to examine the ground carefully, searching for any trace of tracks that might indicate the direction of their departure. North, my king. Though the trail grows faint quickly, whoever led this group clearly understood how to minimize evidence of their passage. Then we follow what remains, Damien said firmly, already moving to remount his horse. However faint the trail, we cannot afford to lose this opportunity. The pursuit continued over the following days, Damien's small party carefully tracking whatever faint signs remained of Elena's group as they moved steadily northward toward Ashgard territory. The trail grew fainter with each passing day, testing even Godric's considerable tracking skills, but Damien refused to abandon the pursuit, driven by a determination that had only grown stronger with the discovery of that small wooden carving. He carried it with him constantly during the journey, tucked carefully into an inner pocket close to his chest, a physical reminder of the hope that continued driving him forward, despite mounting uncertainty about whether he would ever actually catch up to whoever he was pursuing. As Elena's group finally approached the borders of Ashgard territory after several days of careful, exhausting travel, Owen paused at the edge of a wide clearing, his expression tense with concentration as he studied the terrain ahead. "We are close now," he said quietly, glancing back toward Elena and Kian. "Once we cross into Ashgard land properly, we should find greater safety under Mariana's arranged protection." Elena nodded, relief and continued anxiety warring within her chest in equal measure. They had traveled swiftly and carefully, but the constant vigilance required throughout the journey had left her utterly exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As they prepared to cross the final stretch toward Ashgard borders, none of them noticed the small party of Blackthorn scouts closing steadily in from the southern tree line, following whatever faint traces remained of their careful passage through the forest. The threads of fate that had been slowly weaving together across 5 long years were finally drawing toward their inevitable collision, closer now than either Elena or Damien could have imagined possible just days earlier. The morning sun had barely climbed above the tree line when Elena's small group reached the final stretch of forest, separating them from the safety of Ashgard territory. Owen moved cautiously at the front of their party, senses alert for any sign of danger, while Elena kept Kian close beside her, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder as they navigated the uneven terrain. Kian, sensing his mother's tension despite her efforts to remain calm, glanced up at her, with the same intelligent, searching eyes he had possessed since birth. "Are we almost there?" he asked quietly. "Almost," Elena confirmed, forcing a reassuring smile despite the exhaustion weighing heavily on her after days of careful travel. They had nearly reached the natural boundary marking Ashgard territory, a wide stream cutting through the forest floor that Owen had explained would serve as their final barrier before reaching safety, when the unmistakable sound of approaching horses reached their ears from the tree line behind them. Elena's heart stopped. She turned quickly, pulling Kian instinctively closer against her side, while Owen positioned himself protectively in front of both of them, his stance shifting immediately into a defensive posture honed through years of rogue life. 5 riders emerged from the trees, moving with the disciplined coordination of trained soldiers rather than wandering rogues. Elena's breath caught painfully in her throat as she recognized the deep blue and silver colors adorning their uniforms, colors she had not seen in 5 long years but could never fully forget. Blackthorn colors. Panic surged through her chest, and she immediately began calculating escape options, though she knew with sinking certainty that outrunning trained cavalry with a young child in tow offered little realistic hope. Owen tensed beside her, ready to fight if necessary despite the clearly overwhelming odds against them. Then the lead rider pulled back his hood, and Elena's entire world seemed to tilt sideways. Damien. 5 years had changed him considerably, his face harder, more weathered, carrying the weight of responsibilities that had clearly taken their toll during the years since their painful separation. But his eyes, those unmistakable golden eyes, remained exactly as she remembered them, wide now with a shock that mirrored her own overwhelming disbelief. "Elena," he breathed, his voice barely audible across the distance separating them, though the desperate emotion behind that single word carried clearly regardless. Elena said nothing, frozen in place, her hand tightening instinctively around Kian's small shoulder as every instinct screamed at her to run, despite the impossibility of escape. Owen shifted slightly, uncertain how to proceed given the clearly personal history evident between his companion and the approaching Alpha King. Damien dismounted slowly, careful to keep his movements non-threatening despite the authority radiating naturally from his commanding presence. He took several careful steps closer, his gaze fixed entirely on Elena, though it inevitably drifted downward toward the young boy standing protectively beside her. The moment his eyes met Kian's, Damien froze entirely, his breath catching audibly in his throat. Golden eyes, unmistakable, unquestionable golden eyes, staring back at him with a wariness far too mature for a child so young. "He is..." Damien's voice trailed off, unable to complete the sentence, as understanding crashed over him with devastating force. "He is my son," Elena said firmly, stepping slightly forward to place herself more fully between Damien and Kian, her voice carrying a protective edge that left no room for misunderstanding. "And he has nothing to do with you." Damien's expression cracked with visible pain at her words, though he did not argue immediately, his gaze remaining locked on the boy whose features he was already beginning to recognize as unmistakably similar to his own. "Elena," he said carefully. "How old is he?" Elena's silence stretched long and heavy, filled with 5 years of pain, betrayal, and fierce protective love that had shaped every decision she made since that terrible night in the Great Hall. Finally she spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Old enough that you should be able to count the months yourself, if you truly want to understand what you are asking." The realization hit Damien with the force of a physical blow. 5 years. A son who would have been conceived shortly before her banishment, born sometime after her exile from Blackthorn territory. He looked again at Kian's face, seeing now with painful clarity the truth he had somehow missed in his initial shock. "He is mine," Damien said quietly, more statement than question, his voice thick with overwhelming emotion. "He was never meant to be yours," Elena said sharply, her protective instincts flaring fiercely, despite the vulnerability evident beneath her hardened exterior. "You cast me out, Damien. You let your counsel and your fear decide my fate without ever truly listening to the truth. I built a life for him, far from your throne, and I will not allow you to simply claim him now because his existence suits whatever political need you currently have." Damien flinched visibly at her words, the accusation striking deep, despite the years of guilt he had already carried regarding his treatment of her. "I have spent 5 years trying to find you," he said, his voice raw with emotion he rarely allowed others to witness. 5 years uncovering the truth about what really happened that night. Corwin orchestrated everything, Elena. The murder, the false evidence, all of it designed to eliminate you and secure his own growing influence within my council. Elena's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickering behind her carefully maintained composure, though her protective stance around Kian did not waver. "You believe me now," she said slowly. "After 5 years of exile that nearly cost both of us everything." "I believe you," Damien confirmed, taking another careful step closer, his eyes pleading, despite his attempt to maintain composure befitting his royal position. "I have believed you for years now, ever since the evidence began revealing itself. I simply could not find you to make things right." Kian, watching this exchange with sharp, intelligent eyes, far too perceptive for his young age, tugged gently at his mother's sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "is he truly my father?" Elena's composure cracked slightly at the innocent question, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, despite her determination to remain strong. She knelt down carefully to meet Kian's gaze directly, choosing her words with painful deliberation. "He is," she admitted quietly, unable to deny the truth any longer, given the undeniable evidence standing directly before them. Kian studied Damien, with the same searching intensity he applied to everything within his young life, seemingly weighing this new information against whatever understanding he had previously held about his own origins. Damien, meeting his son's gaze fully for the first time, felt something powerful and unfamiliar settle within his chest, a protective love that surprised him with its immediate, overwhelming intensity. "I would like to know him," Damien said carefully, directing his words toward Elena, though his gaze remained fixed on his son. "Not to control him, not to force anything upon either of you. Simply to know him, if you would allow it." Elena hesitated, years of hurt and protective caution warring against the clear sincerity evident in Damien's expression, and the desperate hope carried within his voice. She glanced toward Owen, who offered no guidance beyond a supportive nod, clearly trusting her judgment despite the complicated history unfolding before him. "This does not mean I forgive you," Elena said finally, her voice firm, despite the emotional turmoil evident beneath her careful composure. "And it certainly does not mean I trust you fully, not after everything that happened, but perhaps he deserves the chance to know his father, if you are truly willing to earn that privilege properly." Relief flooded across Damien's face, though he carefully tempered his response, understanding intuitively that Elena's cautious permission represented only the smallest first step toward any genuine reconciliation between them. "I promise you, Elena, I will do everything within my power to prove myself worthy of that trust, however long it takes." As the tension between them slowly began easing into something more careful and uncertain, Owen cleared his throat gently, reminding everyone present of the practical realities still requiring attention. "We were traveling toward Ashgard territory for protection," he said carefully. Given recent developments, I imagine that plan requires reconsideration. Damien nodded, already shifting his focus toward the practical matters of ensuring Elena and Kian's continued safety. You would both be welcome and fully protected within Blackthorn territory, he offered carefully. I understand if you require time to consider such an offer, given everything that has happened. But please know that returning would not mean returning to danger. Corwin's betrayal will be addressed properly, and you would both receive the protection and respect you deserve. Elena considered this offer carefully, weighing the complicated mixture of lingering distrust against the practical benefits of stronger protection within a kingdom capable of properly defending against whatever dangers Kian's growing power might eventually attract. Finally, she nodded slowly, though her expression remained carefully guarded. We will return, she said, but on my terms, Damien. I will not simply resume my previous position, as though these 5 years never happened. Things will be different now, or I will take my son and disappear again, and this time, I promise you will never find us. Damien nodded solemnly, understanding fully the weight and sincerity behind her warning. Whatever terms you require, he agreed without hesitation. I have learned harsh lessons over these past 5 years, Elena. I will not repeat the mistakes that cost us both so dearly. As their small group began the journey back toward Blackthorn territory, Kian walked cautiously between his mother and the father he was only just beginning to know, processing this dramatic shift in his understanding of his own identity and history. Elena watched him carefully, her protective instincts remaining fully alert despite Damien's evident sincerity, unwilling to let her guard down completely until actions, not merely words, proved his genuine commitment to change. Behind them, unknown to any member of their small traveling party, word of this unexpected reunion was already beginning to spread through careful, secretive channels, eventually reaching ears within Blackthorn territory that would prove far less pleased about this dramatic turn of events than their king currently was. News of Elena's return traveled through Blackthorn territory faster than Damien had anticipated, reaching Corwin's ears within hours of the small party's arrival at the packhouse borders. Corwin stood alone in his private chambers, his carefully maintained composure cracking slightly as he absorbed the implications of this unexpected development. 5 years of careful planning, of patiently consolidating power and influence throughout the council, now stood threatened by the sudden return of the one person capable of unraveling everything he had worked to build. If Elena had somehow gathered proof of his involvement in Callum's death, if Damien had discovered the truth during his years of quiet investigation, Corwin's entire position within the kingdom faced immediate and catastrophic collapse. He needed to act quickly, before Damien found the opportunity to formally expose whatever evidence he had gathered before the full council. Corwin began sending careful, coded messages to the loyal allies he had cultivated over recent years, wolves positioned strategically throughout key roles within the pack hierarchy, preparing them for whatever confrontation might soon become necessary. Meanwhile, within the packhouse itself, Damien formally welcomed Elena and Kian back into Blackthorn territory, though he took careful precautions to ensure their safety, given his growing certainty that Corwin would not accept this development without attempting some form of resistance. He assigned trusted guards to watch over Elena and Kian's private quarters, wolves whose loyalty he had personally verified over recent years of careful investigation. Elena settled cautiously into her new circumstances, grateful for Damien's evident efforts to ensure her comfort and safety, while remaining watchful and guarded regarding his true intentions. Kian, adapting with the same remarkable resilience he had shown throughout his young life, began slowly exploring the packhouse grounds under careful supervision, his natural curiosity gradually overcoming his initial wariness about this dramatically different environment. 3 days after their arrival, Damien finally called for a full council meeting, prepared to formally present the evidence he had gathered over 5 years regarding Corwin's true involvement in the events that had led to Elena's wrongful banishment. The great hall filled with council members and pack leaders, many uncertain about the purpose behind this unexpected gathering, though rumors had already begun circulating regarding Elena's dramatic return and the young boy accompanying her, whose resemblance to their king had not gone unnoticed by careful observers. Damien stood before the assembled council, his expression carrying the weight of authority he had cultivated over years of increasingly difficult leadership. Beside him stood Godric, ready to testify regarding the evidence gathered during their investigation, while several other trusted witnesses waited quietly at the edges of the hall, prepared to confirm the details Damien was about to reveal. 5 years ago, Damien began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. I made a grave error in judgment. I banished an innocent Omega, based on evidence that I have since discovered was deliberately fabricated to secure the guilt of someone entirely blameless, while protecting the true culprit responsible for Callum's death. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd, many exchanging uncertain glances as they processed this unexpected admission from their king. Corwin, standing near the front of the gathered council, maintained careful composure, despite the tension visibly building within his rigid posture. "My king," Corwin said carefully, stepping forward with practiced calm, despite the danger he clearly sensed building around him. "Surely, you do not intend to revisit a matter already properly resolved through careful investigation and council consensus." "I intend to reveal the truth," Damien said firmly, his gaze fixed directly on his beta, with an intensity that left little room for misunderstanding. "A truth that implicates you directly, Corwin, in the murder of an innocent guard and the deliberate framing of an innocent Omega, to protect your own growing ambitions within this council." The hall erupted into shocked whispers and exclamations, council members turning toward one another in stunned disbelief as they processed this dramatic accusation against one of their most trusted and influential members. Corwin's expression hardened, calculation replacing his earlier composed calm, as he quickly assessed his rapidly narrowing options. "These are serious accusations without proper evidence," Corwin said, his voice carrying a sharper edge now, clearly recognizing the mounting danger to his position. "I demand to see whatever proof you claim to possess before allowing such reckless claims to poison this council's judgment." "Godric," Damien said, gesturing toward his loyal general, "present what we have gathered." Godric stepped forward, methodically laying out the evidence they had carefully compiled over years of quiet investigation. The timeline discrepancies regarding Elena's whereabouts during the critical window of Callum's death, the witness testimony placing Corwin near the private meeting room shortly before the murder occurred, the unfamiliar scent detected at the scene that had been conveniently dismissed during the original chaotic investigation. Piece by piece, the carefully constructed evidence painted an increasingly damning picture, and Corwin's composure began visibly deteriorating, as council members who had once respected his judgment now regarded him with growing suspicion and open distrust. "This is nothing more than circumstantial speculation," Corwin insisted, though the desperation in his voice betrayed his understanding of how thoroughly his position was crumbling before the assembled council. "You cannot condemn me based on such flimsy assumptions built from years of biased investigation, clearly motivated by your own personal feelings regarding this Omega." "Enough," Damien said sharply, his patience finally exhausted after years of carrying the guilt Corwin's manipulation had caused. "The evidence speaks clearly enough, and your reaction only further confirms what we have already established through careful, methodical investigation." Realizing that his careful web of manipulation had finally unraveled beyond any hope of recovery, Corwin's expression shifted dramatically, calculation transforming into something far more dangerous and desperate. He glanced quickly toward several council members positioned strategically throughout the hall, wolves he had cultivated as loyal allies over recent years, silently signaling for the confrontation he had hoped to avoid, but had clearly prepared for regardless. "If you insist on pursuing this path," Corwin said, his voice suddenly cold and calculating, "then perhaps it is time this kingdom recognized leadership that values strength and decisive action over sentiment and misguided loyalty toward those beneath proper rank." Chaos erupted through the hall as several of Corwin's loyal allies moved suddenly, revealing weapons they had concealed beneath their formal attire, clearly having anticipated exactly this confrontation, despite Damien's careful attempts at discretion. Council members scattered in panic, while Damien's trusted guards moved swiftly to counter this unexpected threat, the great hall descending rapidly into tense confrontation. Damien positioned himself protectively, his years of training and leadership experience guiding his movements with practiced precision, as he worked alongside Godric and his loyal guards to contain the sudden uprising. Corwin, recognizing that his desperate gamble required decisive action, moved swiftly toward the hall's private exit, clearly intending to escape while his loyal allies created enough chaos to cover his departure. But Damien anticipated exactly this move, having prepared carefully for every possible outcome given his growing suspicions about Corwin's likely reaction to formal exposure. Additional guards, positioned strategically at every exit throughout the hall, moved quickly to intercept Corwin's attempted escape, cutting off his path before he could reach safety. The confrontation, though brief, proved intense, testing the loyalty and courage of everyone caught within its chaotic unfolding. Damien fought not merely to defend his throne, but to finally deliver the justice that Elena, Callum, and the entire kingdom deserved, after years of manipulation, orchestrated by someone who had betrayed their trust so thoroughly, and for so long. As the chaos gradually settled, Corwin's remaining loyal allies either subdued or fled the hall entirely. Damien finally cornered his former beta near the private exit he had attempted to reach. Corwin's expression, once so carefully composed and confident, now carried only bitter defeat and simmering resentment. "You could have simply let things remain as they were," Corwin said, his voice tight, with barely controlled anger, despite his clearly hopeless position. The Omega was gone. The matter was settled. Why insist on unraveling everything now, so many years later? "Because innocent people deserve justice," Damien said firmly, his voice carrying the full weight of authority he had worked hard to reclaim throughout this difficult confrontation. "Because I refuse to build my kingdom's future on lies and manipulation, regardless of how convenient those lies might have once seemed." Corwin was taken into custody shortly after. The immediate danger finally resolved, though the full consequences of his betrayal would require careful, proper judgment through formal council proceedings in the days ahead. As the hall gradually settled from the chaos of the confrontation, Damien found Elena waiting anxiously near the entrance. Having rushed toward the great hall, the moment word of the disturbance reached her private quarters. "Are you unharmed?" she asked immediately, relief evident in her expression despite her continued cautious distance from him. "I am fine," Damien confirmed, though visible exhaustion and lingering tension remained evident in his posture. "It is finally over, Elena. The truth has been revealed before the entire council. Your name has been properly cleared." Elena felt a complicated mixture of relief and lingering emotional exhaustion wash over her. 5 years of pain and uncertainty finally reaching some measure of resolution. Though she understood clearly that rebuilding genuine trust with Damien would require far more than a single dramatic confrontation, however necessary and validating it had proven to be. "Where is Kian?" Damien asked, glancing around with sudden concern, given the chaos that had just unfolded within the packhouse. "Safe within our quarters," Elena assured him. "Owen remained with him throughout the disturbance." Damien nodded, relief evident at this confirmation, though the protective concern he had displayed for his son's safety did not escape Elena's careful observation, adding another small measure of cautious hope to the complicated emotions she continued navigating regarding their uncertain future together. As Blackthorn territory slowly began settling from the dramatic events of that eventful day, both Elena and Damien understood that while significant justice had finally been achieved, the path toward genuine healing and rebuilt trust between them remained a journey still very much in its earliest stages. In the weeks following Corwin's exposure and removal from the council, Blackthorn territory slowly began settling into a new, more stable rhythm, though the process of genuine healing continued unfolding gradually, for everyone touched by the years of manipulation and betrayal that had finally reached their resolution. Damien dedicated himself increasingly to demonstrating, through consistent action rather than empty words, his sincere commitment to earning back Elena's trust. He never pushed her toward decisions she was not ready to make, never assumed privileges he had not properly earned through patient, careful effort. Instead, he focused his energy on building a genuine relationship with Kian, spending time with his son whenever Elena permitted it, learning the small details of the boy's personality and interests that he had missed entirely during the first 5 years of his life. Kian, initially cautious and uncertain about this unfamiliar father figure suddenly present within his life, gradually began warming to Damien's patient, genuine efforts. Damien taught him simple training exercises appropriate for his age, careful never to push beyond what felt natural or comfortable for his son. He listened attentively when Kian spoke about his life within the rogue camp, about Owen and Willa and Mariana, honoring these important relationships rather than dismissing them as irrelevant now that Kian had returned to more privileged circumstances. "Owen taught me how to track animals through the forest," Kian told his father one afternoon, as they walked together through the packhouse gardens, Damien listening with genuine interest, despite the vast difference between such practical rogue skills and the formal training typically provided to young wolves within established pack hierarchies. "Perhaps you could teach me some of what he showed you," Damien suggested, earning a surprised but pleased smile from his son at the unexpected request. These small moments of connection gradually built a foundation of genuine affection between father and son, a relationship neither of them had known was missing from their lives until circumstances finally brought them together. Elena watched these interactions carefully, her protective instincts remaining alert, though she found herself increasingly moved by the evident sincerity behind Damien's efforts. Still, lingering tensions remained within the broader packhouse, particularly among council members who had supported Corwin's growing influence over recent years, and now found themselves navigating a dramatically shifted political landscape. A small faction of these remaining loyalists, unwilling to fully accept the exposure of Corwin's betrayal, began quietly organizing resistance against what they viewed as an unwelcome disruption to the established order they had grown comfortable operating within. This resistance came to a dangerous head nearly 2 months after Corwin's initial confrontation, when a small group of his remaining loyal allies attempted a desperate final effort to reclaim influence within the packhouse, targeting Elena and Kian directly, in hopes of destabilizing Damien's position by removing the very people whose return had triggered such significant upheaval within the established council. The attempt occurred during a quiet evening when Elena and Kian were walking together through the packhouse gardens, enjoying a rare moment of peaceful normalcy amid the ongoing adjustments to their new circumstances. Several armed wolves emerged suddenly from concealed positions among the garden's dense foliage, moving with clear intent to capture or harm the pair before proper guards could intervene. Elena reacted instantly, pulling Kian protectively behind her, while calling out sharply for assistance, her rogue training over the past 5 years proving invaluable in this sudden moment of danger. Kian, despite his young age, demonstrated remarkable composure, following his mother's protective guidance without hesitation, while his own instinctive dominance flared unexpectedly, briefly startling their attackers with an intensity that seemed impossible from such a young child. Damien arrived within moments, alerted by the commotion and moving with the swift, decisive action of a king determined to protect his family from any remaining threat. He engaged the attackers directly, his combat training and protective fury combining to quickly overwhelm the desperate, poorly coordinated assault. Additional guards arrived shortly after, securing the remaining attackers and ensuring the immediate danger had been fully neutralized. In the aftermath of this frightening confrontation, Damien knelt beside Elena and Kian, checking carefully to ensure neither had suffered any injury during the brief but intense encounter. "Are you both unharmed?" he asked urgently, his voice carrying genuine fear at how close this attack had come to succeeding. "We are fine," Elena confirmed, though her voice trembled slightly with the lingering adrenaline of the sudden confrontation. Kian protected himself well. Damien looked toward his son, with evident pride and relief, gently placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did wonderfully," he said sincerely. "Your instincts served you well tonight." This dangerous incident, while frightening, ultimately served to strengthen the fragile trust building between Elena and Damien, as she witnessed firsthand his genuine, immediate protective instinct toward both her and their son during a moment of real danger. The remaining loyalists responsible for the attack were swiftly identified and properly dealt with through formal council proceedings, effectively eliminating the last significant resistance to the new stability gradually establishing itself throughout Blackthorn territory. In the following weeks, Elena found herself gradually allowing more genuine warmth back into her interactions with Damien, the careful walls she had maintained since her initial return, slowly beginning to soften, as his consistent, patient actions continued demonstrating a sincerity that mere words alone could never have achieved. She still carried lingering scars from the pain of her banishment, understanding that complete healing would likely require considerably more time and continued effort. But she also recognized, with growing clarity, that the Damien standing before her now differed meaningfully from the king, who had once let political pressure override his trust in her innocence. He had spent 5 years seeking the truth, had risked his own political stability to properly expose Corwin's betrayal, had consistently prioritized both her comfort and Kian's well-being over his own convenience throughout their gradual reunion. One quiet evening, several months after their initial return to Blackthorn territory, Elena found Damien alone on his private balcony, the same location where he had spent countless sleepless nights during the years of her exile, wrestling with guilt and desperate hope for eventual reunion. She joined him quietly, watching the stars scattered across the clear night sky in comfortable silence for several long moments, before finally speaking. "I have been thinking," she said carefully, "about everything that has happened these past months, about the changes I have witnessed in you, and the genuine effort you have shown toward both Kian and myself." Damien turned to face her fully, his expression carrying careful hope, tempered by his continued patience regarding whatever she wished to express. "I meant every effort sincerely," he confirmed quietly. "I understand that trust, once broken so severely, cannot be simply restored through good intentions alone. I am prepared to continue proving myself for however long that process requires." Elena studied him carefully for a long moment, searching for any hint of insincerity despite already believing, deep within her heart, that his commitment carried genuine weight behind it. "I am not asking for more time," she said finally, her voice soft but carrying clear conviction. "I am telling you that I am ready to begin trusting you again, properly, if you remain willing to continue building toward the future we once imagined sharing together." Relief and overwhelming emotion flooded across Damien's face at her words, though he remained careful not to rush forward too quickly, respecting the significance behind her cautious but genuine offer. "I remain entirely willing," he confirmed, his voice thick with sincere emotion. "I have never stopped wanting exactly that future, Elena. Not for a single day throughout these 5 difficult years." They stood together on that quiet balcony as the stars continued their slow procession across the night sky. Two people who had endured tremendous pain and separation, now finally finding their way back toward one another, carrying with them the hard-won wisdom that genuine love required consistent effort, honest communication, and patient dedication, rather than simply passionate feeling alone. Below them, within the packhouse grounds, Kian slept peacefully in his own private quarters, unaware of this significant conversation unfolding between his parents, but increasingly secure in the knowledge that both his mother and father remained committed to building a stable, loving family around him, despite the complicated circumstances surrounding his unusual birth and early childhood. The path toward complete healing remained ongoing, requiring continued patience and effort from everyone involved. But for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall 5 years earlier, both Elena and Damien allowed themselves to fully believe in the possibility of a genuinely happy future together, one built upon truth, trust, and hard-earned wisdom, rather than the naive hope and hidden secrets that had once defined their earlier, more fragile connection. The Great Hall of Blackthorn territory had been transformed entirely for the occasion, banners of deep blue and silver hanging proudly alongside newly added touches of warm gold, a subtle but meaningful nod to the golden-eyed heir, whose existence had once been hidden but now stood proudly at the center of his father's kingdom. Pack members from every corner of the territory had gathered for this historic announcement, curiosity and anticipation evident throughout the assembled crowd. Elena stood quietly in a private chamber adjoining the Great Hall, taking a final steadying breath as she smoothed the elegant fabric of her formal gown, so different from the simple, practical clothing she had worn throughout her years of exile within the rogue camp. Willa, who had traveled from the rogue territory specifically for this momentous occasion, adjusted the final details of Elena's appearance with careful, practiced hands. "You look every bit the queen you are about to become," Willa said warmly, her usual sharp humor softened by genuine emotion at witnessing this remarkable culmination of everything Elena had endured and overcome throughout their years of shared friendship. "Thank you for being here," Elena said sincerely, embracing her old friend with genuine gratitude. "None of this would have been possible without the support I found among you, Owen, and Mariana, during those difficult years." Mariana, standing nearby with quiet pride evident in her weathered expression, stepped forward to offer her own warm embrace. "You have grown into remarkable strength, Elena. This day represents everything you have earned through your courage and resilience." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, overwhelming gratitude combining with nervous anticipation, as she prepared to step into a role she had never imagined possible during those darkest early days of her exile. A gentle knock interrupted the moment, and Elena turned to find Kian standing in the doorway, dressed formally for the occasion, his golden eyes carrying the same intelligent, searching quality that had defined him since birth. "You look beautiful, Mama," Kian said sincerely, offering his mother a warm, genuine smile that never failed to melt her heart completely. "And you look every bit the prince you truly are," Elena replied, kneeling briefly to embrace her son, despite the careful formality of her elegant attire. Damien appeared shortly after, dressed in his own formal royal attire, his expression carrying visible nervousness despite his usual commanding composure. "Are you ready?" he asked Elena softly, extending his hand toward her with evident hope and affection. Elena took his offered hand, feeling the familiar warmth and steadiness that had gradually rebuilt itself between them over recent months of patient, genuine effort. "I am ready," she confirmed, her voice carrying quiet confidence, despite the significance of the moment awaiting them. Together, they moved toward the entrance of the great hall, Kian walking proudly between them, as the assembled crowd fell into respectful silence, anticipating their king's important announcement. Damien stepped forward first, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed hall as he addressed his assembled pack members and council. "5 years ago," Damien began, his voice steady, despite the emotional weight behind his words, "I made a grave and terrible error. I allowed political pressure and fear to override truth and trust, banishing an innocent woman based on manipulated evidence I have since proven was deliberately fabricated by someone who betrayed this entire kingdom for their own selfish ambitions." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, though many present already understood the general outline of events given how thoroughly Corwin's exposure and subsequent proper judgment had become common knowledge throughout the territory over recent months. "Today," Damien continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction, "I stand before you to properly correct that terrible injustice. Elena was never guilty of any crime. She endured 5 years of unjust exile, with remarkable strength and resilience, successfully raising our son entirely alone, under circumstances that would have broken lesser souls." He turned toward Elena, his expression carrying open, unguarded affection that left no room for doubt regarding the sincerity behind his words. "Elena, I am asking you, before this entire assembled kingdom, to accept your rightful place beside me, not hidden or diminished, but fully recognized and honored as my true mate and queen." Elena felt overwhelming emotion rising within her chest as she looked out across the assembled crowd, remembering with painful clarity the terrible night she had walked through these very doors, covered in blood that was never hers, believing she had lost everything meaningful in her life. The contrast between that devastating memory and this triumphant moment felt almost impossible to fully comprehend. "I accept," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent hall with quiet but unmistakable strength. The hall erupted into genuine celebration, pack members who had witnessed Elena's remarkable journey, and Kian's evident goodness over recent months, expressing sincere joy at this long-overdue resolution. Damien turned next toward Kian, kneeling briefly to meet his son's gaze, directly, despite the formal significance of the moment. "And you, my son," Damien said warmly, "deserve full recognition as well. From this day forward, you stand as the rightful heir to the Blackthorn throne, acknowledged fully and proudly before this entire kingdom." Kian, despite his young age, carried himself with remarkable composure and quiet dignity throughout this significant ceremony, his natural leadership qualities evident even in this deeply emotional moment. He nodded solemnly, accepting this formal recognition with the same maturity that had characterized him since his earliest years. The celebration that followed stretched long into the evening, the great hall filled with warmth, music, and genuine joy, as pack members from every corner of Blackthorn territory welcomed Elena and Kian into their rightful, honored positions. Owen, Willa, and Mariana remained close throughout the festivities, honored guests whose contributions to Elena's survival and eventual triumphant return received proper acknowledgement and gratitude from both Elena and Damien. As the evening celebrations gradually wound toward their natural conclusion, Elena found herself standing once more on Damien's private balcony, this time with him beside her, rather than facing the isolation and heartbreak that had once defined this same location during his years of desperate searching and guilt. "Do you remember?" Elena said softly, gazing out over the peaceful territory stretched beneath the star-filled sky. The night I walked away from this very pack house, believing I had lost everything that mattered. I remember every terrible detail, Damien confirmed quietly, his arm wrapping gently around her shoulders, as they stood together in comfortable, healing silence. I will carry the guilt of that night for the rest of my life, though I am grateful beyond words that we found our way back to one another, despite everything that happened. Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling genuine peace settle within her chest, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember. We built something remarkable despite that terrible beginning, she said softly. A son who carries both strength and genuine goodness. A partnership built now on truth rather than hidden secrets. Below them, within the pack house grounds, Kian stood among a small group of pack children his own age, already beginning to form the kind of genuine friendships and connections that would help shape his future as the eventual leader of this remarkable kingdom. His laughter carried faintly up toward the balcony, where his parents stood watching, with evident pride and overwhelming love. He will make a remarkable king one day, Damien said softly, watching his son with quiet, fierce pride. He already carries remarkable strength, Elena agreed. Strength born from difficulty and challenge, tempered by genuine kindness and understanding, that I hope he never loses as he grows into his eventual role. As the stars continued their slow, steady procession across the peaceful night sky above Blackthorn territory, Elena finally allowed herself to fully release the pain and fear that had defined so much of her difficult journey since that terrible night 5 years earlier. She was no longer the frightened, betrayed Omega, who had once walked away covered in blood and hidden secrets. She stood now as queen, honored and respected, beside a king who had proven through consistent action, rather than empty words, that genuine change and redemption remained possible, even after the most devastating betrayals. Their kingdom, having witnessed the full truth of Elena's remarkable strength and unwavering love for her son throughout these dramatic events, embraced her fully and without hesitation, recognizing in her story a powerful testament to resilience, truth, and the enduring strength of genuine love, even when tested by the most difficult circumstances imaginable. The peace that finally settled over Blackthorn territory that evening carried the hard-won wisdom of every difficult year that had led toward this triumphant moment. A peace built not upon naive hope alone, but upon truth finally revealed, trust genuinely rebuilt, and a family finally united in the open, honest way they had always deserved from the very beginning.